Coming up right now, we've got a superstar session, obviously from the superstars of this afternoon, protecting mobile games against hackers, crackers, and copycatters. And that's presented today by Michail Greshishchev from Denuvo by Irdeto. Please give a warm Pocket Gamer Connects Digital 5 welcome. Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the intro. You said it's going to be an easy follow-up. That was actually an incredible talk. So I'm really, really happy with that one. Hi, everyone. So with that, I think that might be a handoff to get things started. Is it okay for me to go ahead and share my screen at this point?
Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. So let's hope things work on the first try. Share screen. All right, we're good to go. So as Kelly mentioned, my name is Michail Greshishchev, and I'm a product manager at Denuvo. I hope you guys are all having an amazing start to PG Connects Digital number 5. And today I'm here to talk to you about an exciting topic about hacking, cracking, and copycatting in mobile games. And I think more importantly, how to actually protect your mobile games from these threats and attack vectors. So we don't have too much time together today. It's just a 20-minute session. But in that time, I'm hoping to help you identify the threats that are relevant to your games or apps based on the features that your games or apps have. And I think more importantly, how to actually protect those features, since at the end of the day, it's probably the features that are your generating revenue factors. So to start things off, I just want to list a few threats that might be applicable to your app. And the point of this would be to find at least one or two that resonate with you, either with a project you're working on now, or maybe an app that you shipped in the past, where in hindsight you look back and you say, oh yeah, we totally missed the potential for that one. And the first one is the potential for your app to be redistributed for the purpose of shipping malware or stealing information. So for example, if you have a free-to-play app that relies on an online service, maybe somebody has rebundled your app with some malicious code in place that would then steal the credentials required to access those online services. Or maybe equally as bad, repackages your app with some malware, which will later on show ads on a user's device even after your app has been removed. And then unfortunately, the users would blame you for putting the malware on their machines, even though they went and found an app that was not distributed through an official platform. I think a more common scenario, and one that a lot of app developers can relate with, is when modified apps then replace the original payment processing methods in the app, or change the ad settings that shipped along with the app. So not only did the app then end up being modified and distributed, but even the ad settings within that app are no longer driving revenue towards your platform, and instead are redirected to that of hacking and cracking groups. And potentially even more dangerously, when the payment processors when those apps are replaced with third parties, and your potentially legitimate customers and fall prey to providing payment information to processors that they should not be engaging with. Another very common example is for cracks and hacks to bypass in-app billing or fast-track in-game progress, essentially either gaining them access to premium and freemium paid features, or bypassing game mechanics that would otherwise encourage users to provide you with in-game spending. If the app is premium, there's always the threat of app piracy, and probably the number one concern of customers we engaged with is, yeah, I just want to prevent my app from ending up on a cracking site the day it's available on an app store. And if the game has a multiplayer feature, and which is more and more prevalent today, is just ensuring that cheaters and hackers aren't spoiling the experience that legitimate users are intended to have. Or even worse, malicious parties aren't exploiting your multiplayer services for the purpose of manipulating your digital economy, like farming currency or the like. So there's a lot of threats, and one easy way to figure out which ones are relevant to your app is by mapping them to app features. So this is an extremely condensed list of a complete map what this would look like, but I'm hoping that at least one or two of these would resonate with you. So if you have a paid application or a premium application, essentially one that somebody has to pay for before they can acquire, the obvious threat is piracy. Somebody takes the app, they strip out the DRM protection, and they make it available for free, giving your users little reason to pursue one that is paid. And similarly, copycatting would take your app and republish it either verbatim or with minor modifications, and then resell it either for a reduced price or encourage users some other way to purchase the copycat version instead of yours. Free apps, luckily, don't need to worry about piracy since the app is already available for free, but the threat of copycatting still remains the same, as at the end of the day, the free application is really just a vehicle to house the revenue-driving services that are housed inside that app, which would then also be copycatted and redirected. If your app contains online connectivity, so if it's a game, maybe it has multiplayer, and if it's really a business app, maybe it syncs to the cloud or something, then you need to worry about credential theft, breaches of privacy, and in cases of games, multiplayer cheating. And if the app uses in-app purchases as a revenue model, then as we discussed before, there's concerns about payment processing methods being replaced or just in-app billing entirely bypassed and no longer being a factor of the app itself. And the last one to mention, a very common avenue is ad-based revenue. And the threat this is susceptible to is ad replacement or removal entirely. In May 2020, we went on a quest to analyze the top 50 games on the Google Play Store. And along with that, we took a look at 64 cracking and cheating sites. We had some quite interesting findings. So out of those top 50 games, 86% of them had hacks and only 14 of them were hack-free. And of those that did have hacks, 80% of them worked for the latest version of the app. And what this means is we are able to successfully take the cheat or hack, run it against the latest version of the app. And if the thing that was run against contained an online component, we verified that we didn't get banned or otherwise had some negative action taken against our account. So how do hackers actually do this? Like, how do they hack an app? How do they modify it? Or what does it even mean to have a hacked app? So in 84% of these cases, the hack was in the form of a modified app package. What this essentially means is somebody took an original app, they unpacked it, they've patched or modified the required code of data, they repackaged the app, and then they republished it, either on a cracking site or some other platform. And in 22% of these cases, the cheat or hack was delivered using memory editors. And these are essentially able to work on a completely unmodified version of the app that you would then legitimately acquire through the App Store. And then you would run a memory editor or a companion application that would then modify the application in a way that was not intended by you, the developer. So let's go into some details to figure out how are these apps modified and how do these memory editors work, and eventually start to understand what can we do to fight against them. So on the side of modifying app packages, just a reminder that the whole point of modifying the app package in the first place is to execute one of those threat vectors we discussed before. So maybe you want to make the app available for piracy for free, or maybe you just want to screw with the ad settings to start collecting ad revenue for every pirated app that you convince someone to get off your forum. The process for this is actually quite simple. So first you analyze the application and find the relevant code or data to patch. So if you want to make the app available for free, you'd have to find code related to the DRM. And if you want to replace the ad settings, you need to find the data related to ad settings. You would then modify the application code or data to do what you intended to do, repackage the application, and then redistribute it on a cracking site. And many tools exist today to make this process fairly trivial. So if your app is using generic AdSense framework and it's using generic, let's say, Google Play Store DRM, then it's a 1 or 2 click process to change these things. It's not very sophisticated and it doesn't actually require finding code or data. It's just using a third-party tool to do this stuff for you. An alternative to modifying the app and then republishing it is using memory editors. And memory editors have a little bit of a higher requirement than just simply repackaging the app. And those requirements are, first and foremost, to require an external tool, so not just the app itself, but you actually need the memory editor to be running. And the memory editor needs to have elevated privileges to the application it's looking to attack or otherwise tamper with. And typically, unless a device is jailbroken or rooted, these type of permissions can't be granted. But assuming these requirements are met, then the hackers can attach a memory editor to the app they're looking to mess with, search for sensitive game code or data they would like to change, alter the game code or data that they found, and then they would take steps 1 to 3, package them into an automated script, and publish them online so millions of other users can reproduce what they did in just a few clicks. And a short example of what this looks like or how it manifests in the real world is this game from the, I believe it was the the iOS store, in which a jailbroken device is used to edit the memory of a game to allow a player to instantly win. So essentially, he just found a match online, and then immediately he's granted a victory without clicking anything or doing anything, robbing another player of a gameplay experience. And the player or the cheater or hacker didn't actually do any cheating or hacking. He just ran a script, which is more sophisticatedly a hooking library, which performs some basic tasks like editing some data in memory and modifying some function calls. So now that we understand what kind of threats apps might be susceptible to, based on the features they have, I have some recommendations for you on how these mobile threats can start to be addressed. And luckily, they fall into 3 nice buckets. There's security by design, passive prevention, and active detection. And security by design, I'm hoping everybody is familiar with. And this is kind of the best practice and by the book way of shifting as much critical logic to the server as possible, going with the mantra of never trusting the client, always assuming it's malicious, making sure the web server APIs or otherwise services are secure, and validating all of the input that is received from the client. And only once these best practices or fundamentals are met, I would recommend moving on to the next steps, which would be introducing passive prevention into your app. And one of the passive prevention methods is making it harder for an attacker to understand what and how to attack your application. And this is typically done through concepts like obfuscation, virtualization, code encryption, etc. And the end goal of these techniques is to hide important game code or data, forcing the attacking groups or the cracker to invest significant time into attacking your application. So move them away from the 1 or 2 click script and force them to really sit down and invest effort into getting through the protection you've put in place. Another layer or addition that could be added is active detection. So in contrast to passively trying to deter attackers, you can actively use the mobile device's resources to perform things like integrity verification, that is verifying that code and data hasn't been changed after the application has been loaded. You can actively try to block or prevent the application from being hooked. And you can do things like detect if you're running on a rooted or jailbroken device and maybe take counter active actions, or maybe notify an online service that, hey, the integrity of the device you're running on is a little bit lower than expected, and therefore maybe not grant this device so many privileges or permissions. And doing all 3 of these is a daunting task when you're trying to create the world's best gameplay experience or the next greatest app. And the reason isn't so much the technical challenge of doing it. I think anyone is capable of reading up and implementing how to do this in a basic manner. The difficult way is doing this in a way that doesn't impact your end user's experience by doing things like reducing their mobile device's battery life or otherwise degrading the experience they would have without passive preventions or active detections being in place. And I think this is where Denuvo by Irdeto really brings their expertise. So we, to date, have now had over 2 billion software licenses issued across multiple platforms, the primarily one being the Windows PC gaming scene. On average, our security has an 120-day crack-free window, so we don't claim to be undefeated, but we do by far have the longest crack-free window in the industry, and we've protected over 1,000 games to date. And for those that have used Denuvo services before, the first thing you'd notice is our very unique approach to integration. And that is, regardless if you're on the Windows operating system or you're on a mobile device, we never ask our customers to modify their source code. So Denuvo protection is always applied at a binary level. And what this means is we actually decompile and disassemble your application. We profile the disassembled bits to identify where relevant protections need to be applied. We then insert the protection at a binary level, reassemble the application, and send that back to you. And of course, all of this is an automated process. It takes 10 minutes or so for a typical app. And your CI pipeline then receives the protected version of the app ready for you to review, stage, and then publish either on the iOS and Android store. And of course, the huge advantage here is your developers don't need any SDKs, APIs. No one needs to learn how to do security from the ground up. And most importantly, you're not littering your source code with security checks. We take this burden from you and we take the full responsibility of managing the security aspect of your application. And the type of protections we apply always remain invisible to the end users because the goal is to preserve the experience you intended them to have. And the type of protection we apply is obfuscation and virtualization, which protects your sensitive game logic or security critical operations, like the DRM that the iOS platform or Google platforms might provide, or if you have any aspects of the game responsible for managing credentials or otherwise dealing with secure data. If your game has an online component, we provide live telemetry, so you're equipped with the tools to deal with cheaters. So this will tell you things like if a player has debuggers attached or has modified their game code or game data. It'll notify you if they're running on a jailbroken device or an emulator, giving you the option to maybe treat these players differently if you so choose to do so. And on top of these two key features, the solution really works on protection plugins, doing everything from hook detection to anti-debugging to continuously verifying integrity of data structures or code in your game. And just like the threats were different based on the type of features your app would have, the protection plugins really just let you customize the type of protection that would be applied to your application to ensure that you're only dealing with threats that are relevant to the type of features your application might have. So at the end of the day, the goal of Denuvo mobile protection is to take the threats we covered earlier and make sure we're dealing with them in a manner where they no longer need to concern you. So if you're ever worried about somebody trying to get a malicious version of your application and instead ending up with malware, your brand is protected because with Denuvo mobile protection, there's no chance that a user would end up with a pirate copy of your app that installs malware. If your sources of revenue are ads or require in-game payment processors, or maybe alternatively, you heavily rely on in-app purchase or premium features, with mobile protection, we secure those revenue streams by making sure they're enforced and not bypassed. If you have a boxed product or a premium product in which the revenue model is upfront, that is, users have to pay to use your app, we try to strive for a 120-day crack-free window to ensure your app isn't cracked in that time. And I think it's worth mentioning here that every time you submit your application for protection, the security on it is renewed, everything is reseeded. So even if somebody manages to crack one version of your application and you manage to release an update since then, you would essentially be restarting the cracker's progress, forcing them to start from day one. So as long as you're updating your app once every 120 or so days, you can benefit from a relatively long crack-free window. And finally, if your game is susceptible to multiplayer cheating, you can take advantage of our telemetry so you're equipped with the tools needed to take action against cheaters and these players. So with that, I really appreciate the time for you guys taking to learn about Denuvo mobile protection. And hopefully some of these threat mappings were useful for you going forward in your project. And this would be a great time to take your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michail. That was really interesting. Again, we've just got an afternoon today, I think, of just really mind-blowingly great stuff. The quality is so high. I've got some great questions for you, though. The first one that's come into us is, which countermeasures are easiest to implement in terms of avoiding performance issues and increasing server load?
Yeah, really great question. So of course, for performance issues, the passive preventions are always probably your best bet. Even though the passive preventions usually end up in things like code bloat or code duplication, like virtualization or obfuscation, that is a magnitude of order lower than running active detections, like routinely scanning your code and data for changes. But in all cases, security always has a cost. It's very rare you'd be able to get away with a security feature that doesn't have a cost associated with it. But what we can guarantee is we'll offer the best balance possible of security versus the performance impact.
Thank you. Another question is, does this interfere with iOS and NDK crash reporting SDKs in any way?
That's a really good question, because actually that's one of the first issues we encountered in the early days of developing this solution. So it did, not anymore. We figured it out. That's a very pointed question. I wonder if somebody knows something.
Shh. What's the most effective way to protect my app from SDK spoofing, both install and event spoofing?
Unfortunately, I cannot provide an answer to that question. I would have to defer that to one of the security engineers. So I really apologize for that.
Okay, this is a great opportunity, therefore, for people to reach out to you guys directly at Denuvo by Irdeto. Is there any indication on the user end that an app has been hacked or compromised?
It depends on the protection settings selected. So if you're talking about online features and things like telemetry, it's up to the server to decide what kind of action they'd like to take against the user. But if you've selected the plugin that prevents the app from running on an emulated device, well, then the user will see that the app cannot start on an emulated device. So it's fairly customizable in that manner. And I think I would flip the question back to you and I'd say, how would you like your app to behave in that scenario? And if we don't do it already, I'll make sure they do it.
Thank you. You know that in this world that obviously you work in, Michail, it's sort of really important, but for people that are developing, there's a lot of bottom line forcing issues. What do you think, in terms of what it is that you guys do, is really the value save for mobile developers moving forwards? Because, I mean, are we talking about, are we saving mobile developers millions of dollars worth of profit? Is it just a small margin that we're saving? I think we can definitely suggest that, looking at some of the news stories that came out during 2020, particularly of apps and games being hacked, especially in Southeast Asia, directly from app stores. It's important for us Western developers as well, and worldwide developers, to know that we're making a good saving on the bottom line by putting our security questions, issues, and needs into the hands of somebody like Denuvo by Irdeto.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So at the end of the day, the goal of this is to protect revenue. Like the question is, which sources of revenue are we capable of protecting? So I think the most difficult one to calculate is probably ones related to brand. So if a teenager or some young person wants to grab a copy of Fortnite that has to be sideloaded through Epic Store, they're equally vulnerable to accidentally grabbing a copy of Fortnite that might steal their credentials or install some adware, and then they would go and blame Epic Games for doing this to them, when in reality it's not their fault. And how to put a monetary figure on that, I honestly cannot provide an answer. However, the ones that are more direct, like securing revenue streams, so I think it's safe to say any app that ends up on the App Store minutes later, so not even hours, minutes later, is available on a cracking site for free, unless it used some third-party DRM solution. And that becomes easy to put a monetary value on because you see, hey, which percentage of users are using a cracked app and how much does that app cost? You multiply together, and it's usually in the millions of dollars. And then the second one, which is slightly more difficult to calculate, is when revenue streams get redirected. So you take a free-to-play game, you change the revenue ads that are displayed in-game to then show ads for cracking and hacking sites, and all of a sudden your free-to-play app is now funding a Russian cracking group or something. So that one is a bit more trickier to calculate, but is one that is probably doable. So at the end of the day, if you have a feature, that feature is probably a key driver to a revenue source. And it's our job to make sure that revenue source stays protected.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So a final question that we've got in from our viewers today on the webinar, of which there's loads and great feedback for you as well. So thanks for coming along. You mentioned that releasing an update tends to reset the clock on hackers trying to crack open the game. Is that in regards to how Denuvo handles the code, or more to do with the ways that hackers do their thing?
Both, actually. So many security solutions are capable of renewing their security on an update, but it all comes down to how diverse is the security every time it's renewed. Like if the change is not significant enough, then the tools that the hackers and crackers use remain effective. And essentially you lose this endless battle of, if we invest X minutes, how many more minutes will it take for a cracker to attack a game? And what Denuvo has gotten extremely good at, especially in the PC platform, is ensuring that for every minute that Denuvo invests into preventing cracking and hacking, it takes months, if not years, for hackers to figure out how to reverse that technique. And we've took that exact same mantra, we brought it to the mobile platform, and the goal is when an app renews its security and the hacker looks at it, they don't have any tools they can use to give them a shortcut. They have to, from the ground up, start reverse engineering the virtual machines and the protection that's in place to figure out how to crack or attack the app.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a really interesting part of this afternoon session. Again, you know, I don't know how we're going to follow it. Each one of the sessions that we're having today are like amazing. So thank you very much indeed, Michail. Thank you.